Michael Belden, and I'm chairman of all the Belden companies.
And I'm Louise Belden, retired.
Mike, tell us very briefly, what was your employment history before you came into the family business?
I worked for the family from the time I was 12 years old until today, with the exception of 3 summers. 2 summers I sold shoes at Joski's, and 1 summer I worked as a carpenter's helper. Other than that, every dime I've ever earned in wages has been from the Belden Group.
Age 12 to today, that's how many years have you been with the company?
66 years.
Let's go back a little while and talk about your father's work history before he came to San Antonio, and then when he came to San Antonio. Let's first address why San Antonio, Texas, because he was in Boston at the time, right?
Well, he was in San Antonio because he was stationed here. He was stationed here before he went overseas, and he was stationed here after he came back from overseas.
During World War II.
During World War II. And he met a man in San Antonio named A.A. Shepard through some mutual friends, who convinced Dad San Antonio needed a roofing company, a good roofing company. And what Shepard meant was a roofing company to serve the post-World War II housing boom. And so what we think of as a roofing company today is not what they were talking about back then. So what Dad actually set up was a different kind of organization than what we are today. We had a lumber yard, we had hardware. What Dad did was he set up the financing for builders, a small group of builders, people who were building a small number of homes. He was in effect their back office. He arranged their financing, he paid their bills, we brokered their millwork, we sold them their lumber, we sold them their hardware, and we put on their roofs. And so all they had to do was worry about actually being on site, getting the houses built, and then selling them, and he was in effect their back office. One of the builders that worked out of there turned out to be Ray Ellison, who became the biggest home builder in San Antonio. And I remember when he went out on his first venture, Dad used to say that Ray was debt fearless. Of course, Dad was a product of the Depression, and Ray went out and borrowed all this money and bought a bunch of lots off Calabra Road, and then eventually out by Lackland. But Ray built a really, really big operation. But when we first knew him, he was building just a few houses a year out of our yard. But then the whole world changed because of people like Ellison, big home builders, and then you had these big lumber yards. We couldn't compete with them. Everything was mechanized. We were handling it 1 board at a time. Here, everything was palleted, and so we got out of the lumber business, and we were still involved with roofing of new homes.
When your dad started the business with Mr. Shepard, what was the name of the business?
AAA Roofing and Supply Company. Started in 1946, and partnership split up at the end of '54 and January '55. Dad started his own business, Belden Roofing and Supply Company.
How would you describe Maury and Ann Belden as business people to somebody who didn't know anything about them? Louise, let's start with you.
My father-in-law was the consummate businessman. Roofing was just the subject of what he did, but he was a businessman. My mother-in-law ran the office. She was the one you watched out for, and she ran it. I mean, she never made a mistake. It was precise. You knew exactly where you stood with her. And actually, my interpretation is the workers went through her to get to my father-in-law. She really was the gatekeeper. And she had a couple of employees that worked under her that were unbelievably loyal to her. And when I first came in, I mean, when you did the payroll, you did it with a little chart. These are the hours, this is the man, and so forth. And you came up with the dollar amount. There were no computers. And they had a machine in the office that was very noisy that posted the jobs and so forth. But she ran it all.
My dad was fairly reserved. He was into charting everything. I mean, we still have up on the wall the charts he used to keep. Every month he put the numbers in for exactly what month we did, how much revenue we'd had that month, and he charted against previous years, and he did bar graphs and everything like that.
My grandfather built spreadsheets before spreadsheets were spreadsheets. He did it all by hand, and then that's how he based all of his decisions, was on numbers. And after my grandfather passed away, we found some of the original worksheets that he used in building his business. And it was mind-boggling to see how he ran calculations in the 40s. And we use complicated spreadsheets today to get the same results. And my grandfather could do it all in his head.
His approach to business was to hire people that knew what they were doing. He was not a roofing guy, so to speak. I mean, he had no background for it, but he hired people that he felt really could do it well. He had 2 or 3 major employees who one ran the field and one ran the sales. And so, but his role was kind of as a conductor. Mother's role, mother much higher strung than dad, much more fiery, ran the office. As Louise said, she ran it with a steel hand. My mother didn't make mistakes and didn't tolerate people who did. She expected everybody to do it right the first time because she did it right the first time. Why couldn't everybody else do it right the first time? But she really made the office tick. She was the driver within the office. Dad was much more laid back as far as operations were concerned. He had people to do that. He watched over it, but he wasn't as directly involved. But he was a very formal person. People at the office called my father Mr. Beldon. They called me Mike. A much less formal guy. And when I was working at the office at 12 years old, somewhat of a chatterbox, I assume, from everything I've read and been told. And I do remember Dad coming out one day. He had his private office, and I was out in kind of like a bullpen with my mother and some other people. And he walked out and very sternly said, "We will now observe 30 minutes of absolute silence." So that was his message to me, to please shut up.
No, there was no negotiating with my grandfather, none whatsoever. It was his way or the highway. With my dad, it's much simpler. I'll give you a good example. My grandfather, the 3x4 Post-it notes or whatever the normal size, 3x3, before they made smaller Post-it notes, my grandfather would call here and he would have us cut his Post-it notes into 1-inch strips and then take them to his house because he said that he could never use up the full 3x3. And he would write small. He would get as much on a 1x3 as everybody else got on a 3x3, but he got 3 times as much out of his Post-it notes. Coming
out of the Depression, Dad didn't believe in throwing things away, and we had these big Post-it notes, and so he'd have the kids come in and cut them up because a lot of that paper was wasted.
Having worked in the same office, not just building, but the same room with your father for all those years, are there 1 or 2 or 3 things, pieces of advice that he gave you on the philosophy of doing business?
Well, I think above all was integrity. That's who we are. We honor our word. We do what we say. And if we mess something up, we fix it. I think second of all was a great respect for employees and taking care of them. They had no place to go. Many people had no support system. And he felt that we should be that support system. And so he always loaned people money from the day he got in business, and interest-free, incidentally. And we'd lose some money every year over that, where people would leave who owed us money, but it was insignificant in terms relative to what good we were able to do by that.
He was a very generous man. He gave and he gave and he gave. And he always said, and I heard my father say it when I was a little kid as well, if we don't give, who will? And that was right. I mean, if you think about it. And that's what we try and teach our kids.
You look back at the old days too, Dad started a tradition that at Christmas, he used to give cigarettes and a turkey to every employee, as well as a lot of people that we did business with. And slowly but surely this grew. Somewhere along the line, we quit giving out cigarettes and we're just giving turkeys. And it became where my office was filled with all these frozen turkeys. We today give gift certificates for turkeys, but I remember we gave these turkeys at Christmas for years and years and years.
On February the 15th of 1963, a fire occurred at your office. Tell us exactly what happened that day in the aftermath of that.
Okay, I'm sitting at my desk about 6 o'clock in the evening, and a guy knocks on the door and yells in, "Hey, do you know you're on fire?" The way our office was designed at that time, we were on West Almas Drive, and it was really a ramshackle building that Dad had put kind of a decent looking facade on it. And the offices were all the way across the front of the building. There was a door that led into the warehouse. The warehouse was attached. And I opened the door of the warehouse and it was in full bloom. And it's interesting that what you think to do, we had a brand new typewriter that we were trying out, a Selectric typewriter, and it was ours on trial. And it was the only thing I grabbed when I ran out of the building. Never thought about taking anything else. Luckily, we had a card system with a 3x5 card on every job we'd ever done. And it was in a fireproof safe. A lot of our records, however, were in cardboard boxes in another room, and we lost all of that backup paperwork. But we did save that card file, which meant that we had a record on all of our jobs, so we were fine, we were okay. But we had to find someplace to go, because the building burned to the ground.
Everything.
Everything.
It was a huge fire. It was across the front pages of all the papers the next morning. It was big.
Yeah, so we had to find someplace to do business, and so Saturday we started looking. And I don't remember names very well, but I can tell you the guy named Carlos Sanchez was a realtor, called us and suggested the Guido lumber facility. We went down, we looked at it, we said that'll work. Sunday, the Guido family and the BELDON family were there cleaning the place up, getting it ready to go, and Monday morning we were in business. Our suppliers brought new materials. We had everything we needed except phone service. There were no cell phones in those days, and that was still the days when we're the only phone company in town, and we act like it, and they just couldn't do anything for us. And so what we did was, the only thing they would do is they would relay the calls that came into us to my kid sister's house, Nancy, who lived north of 410, and then we ran a courier service back and forth with phone messages for a couple of days till the phone company finally got us phone service. West Martin, which was in an urban renewal area, we knew eventually they would take it, but that gave us time to find our own place. We didn't ever expect to stay there 5 years, but we did. And then in 1968, we built our own building on West Avenue, which we're in today.
Tell us about the thought process of the location and also the design of the building.
So Dad had a piece of property over near the airport, which he always thought we would build on. But it didn't seem to be the perfect spot for a lot of reasons. It was in an area that eventually developed, but back then it wasn't terribly developed. And Louise actually saw a for sale sign on the lot on West Avenue, which was next door to Columbia Bowling Ball. And she came and told us about it, and we went and looked at it, and they sold us that property. We designed the building. It's designed in a circular fashion so that all the offices come off a central core, and we had a warehouse in the back that was somewhat detached. But over the years, we added what was a kitchen showroom, which has changed many, many times in housing different part. We got out of the kitchen business. It's general offices. We have sales offices out there. We have accounting offices out there. So we have that second building. We eventually added a big conference room, and then we added a second story addition. And then we bought a building across the street, which now houses our Leaf Guard San Antonio operation. And so we've grown a lot, but the reason we've been able to stay there is so much of our growth as a company has been out of state.
Your company has been involved in many trade organizations like the NRCA, which stands for National Roofing Contractors Association?
Correct.
What have you gained from your involvement with that organization and others?
Well, I'd say several things. You learn a lot by being involved with people who are your peers. And so, but I think the first thing I got out of it was more respect for what we do. Louise likes to say before we got involved with NRCA, I considered myself a roofer. After that, I became a roofing contractor. It's much more professional. I mean, I began to look at myself as a professional as opposed to just a roofer. We
was a
were a trade,
businessman.
a business, and we became very proud of that business. So we've done a lot of work because we just know people all over the country.
Your father was on the board of directors at the Broadway National Bank for many years.
Over 50.
Why was that important to him and to the business?
Well, first of all, he knew the Cheever family, and so they knew what a bright guy he was and how perfect he was to help them grow their bank. But he loved it because Dad was truly an intellectual, and that the board was also the loan committee for many, many years, and so Dad was able to take that great intellect he had and be able to analyze lots of other businesses. And I think he got much more pleasure from that than from running his own business, which was operation intensive, ball juggling and everything, but not necessarily intellectually stimulating. You didn't spend hours planning everything, you did. Here he would spend hours analyzing other things, analyzing loans, analyzing people's ability to pay back the loans. And I hear over and over and over again from so many people that he absolutely was the best loan officer there ever was, that he was the person that everybody looked to. If Dad said it was okay, the rest would say, yeah, he's done his homework.
Over the years and currently, as the chairman, tough times and challenges occur. How do you get through tough times in business?
Well, once again, you need to have a support system. Whether that support system is your family helping you decide what to do, whether that support system is being able to go to your bank and know that they'll back you. And then sometimes it could even be family people putting money in the business to help through a real crisis. I mean, there's all sorts of things that businesses go through. And we've been through every one of those from the get-go. I mean, you know, we've been in business now so many years, going back to 1946. So over 70 years, so we're going to see good times and bad times. But the thing is to develop a plan and then execute the plan.
Mike, tell us the responsibilities that you had within the company from the beginning and briefly as you went along through the years.
You know, I think it's best described by a friend who introduced me one time at a meeting and said Mike came to the business, worked really, really hard, and then one day his daddy made him president. So I started out, you know, I walk in from college and I really don't have a role. I had to learn one, and that became estimating. And I learned how to estimate, learned out that side of the business, and then my job was to grow the business. And so when I started, half of our work was actually with Ray Ellison Homes, putting on new roofs on new construction. San Antonio was starting to grow about the time Louise and I got married, and so I expanded that into roofing apartments and then shopping centers and all commercial buildings. Then as we got into, by the time we were in the 80s, we were working for all the major developers in town doing all of their work. But like many businesses, it's gone up and down, and we've had to redefine ourselves. When the developers, the 80s, when that crashed, the developers stopped developing, and so then we went into the military business, started doing a lot of work with the military. We started doing more and more commercial re-roofing. In 1996, we added a leaf guard division, which is now several times larger than our roofing business.
Louise, what was your employment history before you came to work with the company?
After I got married, I taught school for 2 years. And then I had children, was involved in the community, and I was what Mike would call bench strength at the office. When the rains came, Louise came. When someone went on vacation, Louise came. I even served as his secretary one time for a couple of weeks, but that only lasted one time.
A couple of weeks only, just one time?
No, just as secretary to Mike.
Right.
But
why only 2 weeks?
Our marriage does better when I don't. In the office, Mike is the king, but he is not my king. And that's the way, you know, if I had an issue at home, he had to help me deal with it because we were both working. And, but it worked, you know, 20 years or so. I mean, we managed to make it work, and a lot of it we took home with us, and as a result, our kids heard about the business all the time, and they knew a lot about it. So when Brad came into the business, he was fully prepared. He had heard it at the dinner table. When Allie came in, when Jonathan came in, I mean, they all knew what was going on and what to expect.
Ever since I was a little kid, when my dad would come home and we'd have dinner, well, most of the times my dad didn't make it home in time for dinner, but when he did come home in time for dinner, I would always be asking questions about the business. What did you do? How do you do this? Since I was a little kid, I mean, this is the only thing I ever wanted to do.
When Louise was purchasing, I tell people the story often about a supplier who came to town and took us to dinner when Louise was doing all the purchasing and said, guys, we've got good news and bad news for you.
And I'll never forget this. He said, Louise, you are one of our top 5 customers in the entire country. And my mom said, that's great. He said, no, that's not so great. The fact that you're one of our top 5, we'd be really happy, except you're our lowest grossing customer that we have.
Meaning profit?
Profit-wise. And that was not a compliment. He said to my mom at that dinner, he said, Louise, you try and buy everything like it has a coupon, like you're going to the supermarket. We don't have coupons in the roofing business. You can't give us a coupon to get another penny off. And that was my mom. My mom always thought she could get a better deal.
Lots of times she knew a lot more about it than the people who were selling the product, and what would fit on a truck and how it all worked together and everything. And she would sometimes teach the suppliers how to bundle those things together. And so when she bought it, she bought roofing like she buys groceries. She worried about the pennies. And so, I mean, she did a good job in what she did. I think probably at the peak, she had about 35 people working for her. And so she played a major role in our coming out of the doldrums of the 80s.
Did you ever have a discussion with your father, and did your father ever talk to you about having a choice to go into the business or not go into the business?
Never talked about it. I just always understood that's what I would do. I worked there, as I say, when I was 12 years old, and during the summers when I was in college, I came in and filled in in the production department, in the supervisory production department. I never actually worked on roofs. And when I graduated, it was just assumed I would come to work, and that's what I did. And when I got there, although I took my role mostly in estimating and sales, the first project I undertook was a change of our Yellow Page ad. And I said to Dad, gosh, that's an ugly Yellow Page ad. I'm going to get an advertising agency to get us a new ad. And Dad said, well, advertising agencies won't do that. I said, okay. He said, go get it done if you can. So I called the 2 big agencies in San Antonio, and they blew me off. And I called Larry Sacknowitz, my dear friend from San Antonio, who was now with an advertising agency in Houston, and said, Sack, would you design a Yellow Page ad for us? He said, sure. And so he designed this great looking ad for us, and special typeface and everything, and it was beautiful. Cell phone company came, and they liked the ad, but they would not print it in whole. They were going to cut out the address and the phone number and set that in type, because that way, if we changed, they could change it. No amount of assurance on our part that those things wouldn't change would change their minds, and they couldn't match our typeface. So we were going to have this beautiful ad with typeface that didn't match. And I wouldn't agree to it. And finally they called me and they said, you either agree or you're not going to be in the phone book. So I said, okay, I got no choice. But I was a lot feistier in those days. Eventually wrote the chairman of the board of AT&T with this long letter about it, and got a letter back from somebody very high in the organization apologizing and saying that there was one man in San Antonio that could fix it. And it turned out that he lived a block from us. And he came in, he solved the problem. They gave me the ad for free.
Advertising has been an important part of your business over the years. How did your father originally get new clients?
Well, when I came in the business, over half of almost all of our business was working for home builders. And so, of course, that was repeat business, and you knew who they were, and we did their work. And so whether it was Ray Ellison or Edgar Von Schiele or the Gaskins or all these people who were building homes at that time, we were doing some re-roofing and kind of word of mouth. You'd meet somebody, you'd do a good job, and word of mouth. And then Dad started running little small ads in the paper that just said Belden, a name you can trust. And then we started advertising on TV, and Larry Sacknowitz was in Houston, and Larry took on and made us famous in San Antonio with his advertising.
It takes a long time to make a name for yourself. We've been working on it in San Antonio for more than a quarter of a century. Belden Roofing and Remodeling. You can trust us to the letter.
I will tell you what my favorite advertising story is. This was when we were down in West Martin. We'd had the fire, and we were in this building down in West Martin. And Dad and I, when we were on Almas Drive, we were in the same office on West Martin. Our office was divided, but it was just a little divider. We could still see each other and talk to each other. And Larry came in, and he said, "I've got a great idea for an advertising campaign." Because we were saying that Belden, a name you can trust, he said, "Belden Roofing and Trust Company." And my father said, "Larry, that's the dumbest blank idea I've ever heard in my life." And Larry jumped up and screamed, "No, Maury, it's great, I promise you, it's great." And it was great. We did it. People talked about it forever. It was one of our great campaigns.
So many homeowners trust Belden Roofing and Remodeling. We've been called Belden Roofing and Trust Company. Why don't you call us?
Tell us, I'm going to name a particular division or part of your company over the years, and tell us very briefly a story about that, its opening or closing, and its success or lack of success. Remodeling.
We got in the remodeling business back in the probably mid-'60s. People used to ask us for recommendations of people to do work at their homes. And we finally decided, well, we'd recommend ourselves. And we had a guy that we used to call for work, a guy named Harvey Shin, and we hired Harvey to build a remodeling division for us. And we did that for about 30 years.
Well, I married Mike's sister, and after a number of years, I'm a CPA, and after a number of years, Mike called me, said the business is starting to grow and we need somebody who can handle that end of it. And so I said, okay, I'll sell my business and come on board.
What year was that?
I think it was 1973. The first role, I was in charge of remodeling. And at that time, we were doing a lot of remodeling of homes, kitchens, additions, bathrooms. And then we added a handyman division where people needed somebody, a carpenter, a painter, that would go out and take care of little things. And at one time, I think we had 30 handymen on staff because nobody else in town was doing that kind of work, and they knew Belden, they trusted Belden, and it was terrific in terms of small amount compared to a roof, but a lot of different customers, so you spread your name. It was really good advertising.
I hated that business because we were inside people's homes. And working inside people's homes is difficult, particularly if it's a significant size job. You're there for a long time, and even under the best of conditions, it's hard. And so when we got in the leaf guard business, it was a perfect opportunity to exit the remodeling business, and we took all of the people, practically every person from the remodeling division, except for one or two, and moved them into the leaf guard division or into the roofing division.
Well, in 1996, as I had been involved in the remodeling division here at Belden, Mike Belden called me in one time and he said, if it was your company, what would you do with remodeling with the leaf guard accelerating the way it is? And he said, he asked me to go back and spend a week researching it, looking at what we were throwing to it, and come back and give him my decision. So I came back a week later and sat down with him, and he asked me, I said, well, Mike, if it was my business, I'd shut down remodeling and go with leaf guard because it's a rising star within the company at this point. he said, well, that's good. He said, I just wanted somebody to validate what I had made the decision was. And my next statement is, I need to ask you a question. He said, what's that? And I said, well, I'm the general manager of remodeling. How does that affect me? And he laughed and he said, well, he said, we're going to keep the good ones and we'll just move on with the other ones and everything. And so we ended up keeping, there was I think five of us out of the remodeling division that we absorbed within Belden, both the roofing and the leaf guard division, and 2 of us are still here after that long time, 20 years.
And we've reinvented ourselves a number of times because things have changed, because during the 80s times got terrible and we were doing all the work for developers. Developers stopped working. We had no work. We had to go find new work. We had to find something else to do.
I mean, in the 80s, personally, we had to cut back in order to invest all our efforts into the company. I mean, we had a lot of people working for us that were dependent upon us, and it wasn't just our survival, it was to help the people that worked for us survive.
It's the only time we ever had to lay people off, and that was really, really painful. And there's been massive changes in the last 20 years, which is during the time that Brad's been with us. Brad's been with us full time since '88. He graduated from college in '86, went to work for a friend of ours in DC who was also in the roofing business to get a kind of a different perspective. And that's how he happened to meet Susan in DC, because he was up there working for another roofing company. And then he's been back here full time since '88, and just massive changes in the industry since '88. Prior to that, there hadn't been a whole lot of changes.
Well, I've been here since I was born. I guess my first full-time job was when I was 12 years old, and my dad hired me to cut the grass and clean the yard. And so I started doing that. And every summer since I was 12 years old, I've been working here. He wanted to look like Wimbledon, and I told him he wasn't paying for Wimbledon. And so we both agreed that it wouldn't look so good. But we only had a strip that maybe was 4 feet wide by about 40 feet, and I cut it once a week, and other than that, I was cleaning the yard. So he never ended up complaining much more than that after we had that discussion about Wimbledon.
When things were still pretty bad here, Louise and I went to a meeting in South Carolina where the executive director of the National Roofing Contractors Association was retiring. And on Friday night, a fellow named Billy Fort was then the president of the association, and he was from South Carolina, and he mentioned that there was a big job bidding Monday morning. And we kind of laughed about it, and I said, well, I could do that job. Because Billy said I couldn't do it. He said they were booked for a year, because this was after Hugo.
Hurricane Hugo.
After Hurricane Hugo. And so I asked him Saturday night, I said, Billy, how serious are you about this job? He said, I'm serious as a heart attack. I said, let's have breakfast tomorrow morning. So we got up early Sunday morning, decided that we would bid this job. I called Brad. Unfortunately, something wrong with his phone. It was off the hook or something, so I had to call Danny, a son-in-law, who went and got Brad.
So Sunday morning, my brother-in-law lived one street over. Well, I had taken the phone off the hook to get a good night's sleep, and I had no idea my dad was looking for me. And so he called my brother-in-law like 6 o'clock in the morning. And my brother-in-law came and was ringing the doorbell and pounding on the door and said, you're leaving on a flight in an hour or two. And I said, what are you talking about? He had woken me up, and he said, you're going somewhere in South Carolina, call your dad right away. So I called my dad, and he said, look, this job bid's tomorrow. We went out, measured the building, and back then we used fax machines. And we were faxing the quantities back and forth, and they were putting it into the computer here in San Antonio, faxing it back to me to verify that the quantities were correct. And we won a $2 million job by less than $40,000. And what we did was we went and bought a school bus. We painted it silver and put a burgundy stripe down it, and we called it the Silver Bullet. And so we drove that to South Carolina, and or the crews drove it to South Carolina. I'd already flown out there to get the job started. Well, when the crew showed up, when they showed up, I saw something sticking out of the back of the bus. So I said to Pablo, I said, hey, did something break on the bus on the way over here? And he said, no, sir, that's the restroom. And I said, I didn't know we had a restroom on the bus. And he said, yeah, sir, it's a funnel with a hole. And I said, what do you mean a funnel with a hole? He said, yeah, we didn't want to stop. So we drilled a hole in the bus, stuck a funnel, and it became a restroom. And I went, are you kidding me? You drove down the highway and used that as a restroom? He said, sir, you asked. I was always told not to lie. That's what we did. And so obviously I had them remove it that day, but I was so embarrassed. But it was, people here understand, just tell us the truth and we can deal with it. And he didn't want to lie to me.
We'd never traveled probably beyond Houston by now, and we had to figure out how to do it. And so we did, and we learned how to travel, and that led us to doing a lot of work around the country because we learned what traveling was all about and how to price it and what the costs really were. And finally brought it down to it's so much a man hour to do it is what we can really bring it down to. We can simplify it dramatically.
You mentioned briefly, but let's go into a little more detail about the military business, working for the military.
So when we learned to travel on that job in South Carolina, we realized that we could travel anywhere. And we were coming out of the 80s and we were looking for more places to work, and the government had what they call IDQ work, indefinite quantity work, which means bidding unit prices. And so the government never quite figured out that they needed to match up things that went together. So for instance, they might say, well, I want 100 squares, and a square is 100 square feet, of tear off, and I want 200 squares of roofing. Well, obviously they were going to be the same amount. And what you did was you took all the items they had, you put a price on them, and you extended it, and you totaled it, and that was your bid. So the trick was to put the money in, so if you had 200 squares of roofing and 100 squares of tear off, you'd put more money into the tear off than into the roofing because the extensions would be cheaper, even though when you actually ended up doing it, it wouldn't work out that way. They also had stuff on there that they were never going to do. And so you'd put real low prices on that. So it became who could figure out how to do these, manipulate spreadsheets the best. And Brad became a master at it, and we did a lot of government work, and they loved us because they had to take whatever contractor was low on this type of bidding. And so when they got us, and we were a really legitimate roofing contractor who did really good work for them, they were really pleased, and they gave us as much work as they could under the contracts. Unfortunately, ultimately, the government set all that work aside for minorities and women-owned businesses and things, and it just took us completely out of that business. But one of our great company stories, we were doing a job in Camp Lejeune. We had a young kid that had come to work for us in high school. His name is Danny Mendes.
So we were looking for a vocational student to do night work at the office. Well, so I went to Lee High School, which was my alma mater, which is right down the street. And I called Lee and I said, can you please send me a mechanic that can work here from 3 to 10 or whatever the hours were? And they said, absolutely. And so we hired this mechanic, minimum wage, and they came here every day. And after about a week or two, I asked him to grease the front ends of the vehicles. And so we had probably 20 two-ton trucks at that time, maybe 22. And so the next morning, I came back in and I was walking through the yard and I noticed that it looked like there was Vaseline on the front end of every single truck in the yard.
On the outside.
And I looked at it and I walked over and I wiped it and I thought, I obviously did not communicate well enough that I meant to grease the mechanical part of the truck. So I called Lee High School and I said, look, this is not going to work. He's not the mechanic I was looking for. What else do you have? And they said, well, we have a student who's studying electrical. I said, send him to me. And they said, well, but you want a mechanic? I said, I'll teach him. So Danny came to us and he was working same schedule, nights. And we got a job on the East Coast at Camp Lejeune. And we were sending bunch of crews over there from after a hurricane.
I was asked if I would travel outside of San Antonio at an early age to help assist maintain equipment in the state of North Carolina, where Belden had just been awarded an IDQ contract to re-roof multiple facilities. So that would have been in 95, 96, and that was my first full-time change in role of being away from San Antonio and going outside of Texas.
And slowly but surely, Danny, like at 18 years old, became the number 2 guy on the job. He just is the sort of guy that has always accepted responsibility and reached for responsibility. Came back to San Antonio, we made him a superintendent. A few years after that, his boss, a guy named Art Walker, who had worked for us for 10 years, walked in one day and said, "Mike, I can't do this job anymore. It's too tough. I'm getting too old. I need to do something easier." So Brad and I looked all over the country for a new general superintendent, and we talked to people that worked for us. And Danny applied for that job, and Brad and I just somehow felt that Danny had something special. And so we hired him as our general superintendent at the age of about, I don't know, 25, 26 years old, something like that. And 2 years ago, Danny became president of Belden Roofing Company.
You mentioned the word leaf guard. What is leaf guard, and how did it come to you, and how has it grown?
Leaf guard is a residential rain gutter system that's protected so that the leaves don't go in the gutters. It has a curved top so that the water will track in to the gutter, but the leaves will stay out. And we'd always had people asking us about what to do about leaves in gutters, and we never had an answer because we knew screens didn't work because we tried them. And screens just clogged up and made it impossible to even clean the gutters out. And I saw this advertisement in a trade magazine for a product called a leaf guard. I didn't know what it was. I sent away for it. They sent me a sample and I didn't know which end was up. It just so happened their main office is located in Perth Amboy, New Jersey. And our daughter Jennifer was going to be in a wedding in Perth Amboy for sorority, her little sister in sorority from college, whose parents had come to Jen's wedding, so we had to go to this little girl's wedding. And it just so happened that it was very close to where the leaf guard was owned by a company named Angler, where they were located. So we went up to visit them, and Jen and James went with us, and we went through and we met the family, and they also a family business. And we decided that we'd take the product on, not expecting to do a whole lot of business with it. It was just would be a nice addition to our residential roofing business. So we started in it. About 6 months after getting in it, I said, "Oh my God, this is really a cool product." So I called them and said, "Hey, I'd like to do more of this. Are there any other opportunities out there where we could do this?" Well, it just so happened that they were manufacturers. They didn't really understand the leaf guard business. The leaf guard business is, to a great extent, a sales and marketing business. You need to advertise, you need to be able to show benefits and features because it's not a cheap system, not like just regular open gutters put on by guys I'll call gutter guys who just go out and run seamless gutters. They had set up a bunch of seamless gutter guys in this business because that's who their customer base was, not understanding that these guys were not the right people to be running leaf guard offices. And so many of them were failing. So we took over the Houston branch, which was, there was nobody there. There was a machine, but there was nobody running it. And so we bought the machine and we started up in Houston. We went to Seattle where the guy was losing a lot of money, couldn't pay his bills, and offered to buy his business. He said no. I came back a second time, made a second trip out to Seattle and offered to buy his business again and make him the general manager. We made a deal on that, and as soon as he came to work for us as our general manager, I knew why he was failing in the leaf guard business. And so we began to expand. From the Northwest, across the Midwest, into the Northeast, and down in Atlanta, and every place in Texas. And it now is 2 to 3 times the size of our roofing business.
How would you characterize Mike as a businessman over all these years?
I'm proud of him. I think he's done an amazing job. I think he started with a company of with integrity, but he has really grown the business. And just doing roofing, sometimes there's highs and there's lows in roofing. And so in order to keep these people that work for us employed and to stay in business, we look for other avenues to diversify. And we've done it well. And I think that they can only continue to grow because of his leadership.
So where I sit is I'm the gatekeeper. What I didn't know from one of my coworkers, James Goodwin, who's also worked here as long as I have, is that when everybody realized that you couldn't just walk into Mike Beldon's office, that you'd have to go through Sandra, that I would stop them. And they started to call me LG, and I didn't know what that meant. 5, maybe 10 years later, probably, it meant little general, because I wouldn't let people in. So they knew, you do not go into Mike Beldon's office till you talk with me. I will let you know, is he in a good mood or is he in a bad mood? And so if I did this, means don't even come in here. Don't walk past this invisible line. Don't go there. And if I did this, go ahead and go in. If I said, no, this is not a good day, come back tomorrow. Tomorrow may not work either, but just come back. What Mike didn't want was anyone to come to me or to his office and present a problem if they didn't have a solution. So what I would say is, tell me your problem. What happened? What's going on? Do you have a solution? If you don't have a solution, come back. Come back, because you're not going to listen to it. Because if you can't solve it and you want him to solve it, then we don't need you. I mean,
Is that a good business?
I think so. I mean, why are we put in charge? Why does Mike put us in charge if we can't make the decisions that he knows that we can make?
I know when I started with the company, Mike had a pencil, a 6 foot high pencil, tall. And I think the kids had given it to him because he's always editing, right? So I remember when we do proposals, he'd get this red pen and he'd edit like crazy. Well, it makes you better. I mean, so, professional growth, I think, is what the best thing that's happened to me coming to the company.
The thing that stood out the most was Mike saying, in order to grow with our organization, we would expect that you would never lie to us. And that stood out a lot because it brought back family values that, you know what, a person with honesty grows and can grow to something big. And that just stood out a lot coming from the CEO of our organization.
But it wasn't just the business, it was community involvement too. I think that's part of what made our business actually grow, because people in the community have been very supportive of Belden Roofing, because I think they feel like we give back.
So one of the philosophies that we have at work is that you have to give back in your community. We don't care how you do it. We just ask that everybody give back in their community. And recently we went and did a Habitat for Humanity. And it was really cool. We had 25 of us, spent the whole day together. It was a beautiful day. It was actually kind of hot. But we roofed a storage shed. We built a storage shed, we roofed it. We put on trim. And we got to work with the individual who's going to own the home. And it was just really rewarding. And at the end of the day, he thanked every one of us before we left. And we're, Habitat for Humanity for us is we have a history with that. And for our 50th anniversary, we went to Habitat for Humanity and we asked them if we could roof 50 homes for them as a gift back to the community. Well, they were thrilled, except they said, we can't build 50 homes in a year. So it took us 3 years, but we roofed 50 homes for them. And I still remember it to this day, and it was one of the greatest things that we did for the community.
Mike is a very brilliant businessman. When it comes to business itself, he's not real emotional. He's pretty analytical. I think he learned over the years. His father was more philosophical and on a different level. Mike was sometimes nuts and bolts, but he understood that somewhere down there I'm making a goal and we're going to grow. And there were times when father and son, you know, they seemed to disagree. Sometimes oil, sometimes water doesn't mix. But in the end, they both knew that, and it was amazing to see that mature from the time I got here, that as my father-in-law was letting go a little, Mike was growing. And I know it was hard for a while for my father-in-law to finally realize that it's time for the next generation. So he started that, and Mike has done that with Brad.
Brad and I are both sales oriented and operating oriented, and so we have a lot of fun. We laugh a lot. We enjoy the business. Look, I couldn't walk away from the business completely. It's who I am. But I love going there because it's a nice place to be. I like being there. I like the people. I just like being around them. And I like being around Brad, and I like working with him. Even on days we make each other crazy, I like working with Brad because we see the world the same. And the only things that bother me about Brad is in some ways he was who I was at his age, and I know better today. But he's an extremely caring guy. He does things for employees that you wouldn't believe. And it's a great atmosphere, and I just like being there. Even if I'm not doing anything to do with the business, I just like being there.
Over the years, your company has won many awards. Which ones or one means the most to you? Louise?
Well, I think the Family Business Award from Baylor was really important to us. It was a recognition that we were a good company. We did it well. I think the Business Hall of Fame, when Mike and I were honored, was a business award that recognized us in the community.
We won a lot of those awards, and so I think it tells you who we are. I mean, we meet the standard.
I think one of the things that I think about when you talk about the business, when Mike came into the business, they were so excited that it was a $300,000 year. And he talked about we've grown so much. I don't know what our revenues are today, but the whole business has really changed and grown. I'm so proud of what they have done.
Well, last year we finally hit $100 million revenue.
That's a far cry from $300,000.
It's grown a lot.
How would you see, if you were to walk around that business today and know the ins and outs of the business, which of course you do, where do you see evidence of Maury and Ann Belden?
Integrity and values, and every employee is treated as though they were family. And we truly believe that. When they come to work for us, we take a lot of responsibility for them and for their family. I mean, that's important to us.
I would tell you that we do it on 3 levels. We meet or exceed the expectations of our customers, our suppliers, and our employees. And when I say meet or exceed the expectations of our suppliers, we don't send unsigned checks. We don't claim the check is in the mail when it's not. If we need more time, we pick up the phone and call them. Say, hey, we're not going to mail the check for 2 days. If we make a deal with them, that's the deal. We'll bargain hard, but once the deal's done, the deal's the deal. Our word's good. So integrity both with our customers and with our suppliers, and caring about our employees. And all those are from when Mother and Dad started, and those are very much a part of who we are as a company today.
You spoke about an honor that you received from Baylor University for family businesses. That is quite an honor, considering the odds of families working together in harmony.
And I do believe that that our next generation is not far behind, and that it'll work, because we're determined to make it work. We're very proud of the Belden name, and we're proud of the fact that we've been able to carry it on from generation to generation.
Brad's kids, his 3 oldest kids, have worked at the office. His 2 oldest girls have worked off and on at the office forever. His son comes in after school every day. I fully expect Brad's kids to take this business and run with it. I'm not sure which one. I think probably there's a good chance that 2 of Brad's kids will ultimately come in the business. So I'm confident there will be a 4th generation. And knowing these kids, they'll do well, and there'll be another generation beyond that.
When I look towards the future of this company, I am really excited about the opportunity of working with my kids. The relationship that I share with my dad and the relationship that I shared with my grandfather, I hope that I'll be able to share that relationship with my kids. It's so rewarding to work with my dad and with my grandfather. And it's not that we're coworkers. I mean, we are coworkers, and we're father, grandfather, grandson, son. It's that I don't ever have to worry about one of them ever delivering. If they say they're going to do something, by God, it's done. And that's one less thing I got to worry about in solving a customer's needs. It's a true partnership.
1 or 2 more, 3 more generations, 5, 10, 50 years from now, what do you see?
Well, I suspect, much as I changed the business for my dad and Brad changed the business for me, that the next generations will change the business. They'll do different things, or they'll do more things, or the world is changing. They may get into new products or services. But knowing the kids that are likely to come into the business, and knowing how bright they are, and knowing how capable they are, I'm sure they're going to find it won't be the same. I'm confident of that. But what I'm also confident of is that the values won't change. I mean, the kids coming into the business know that value system. They get it. They hear it all the time. Like Louise says, we talk about business all the time. And whether it's with our kids or with our grandkids, it's always the subject of table talk. And so they get it. They know who we are. They know what's important to us. And so I'm confident that that will remain the same. But as far as the business goes, Lord only knows what they'll decide to do.
I will tell you that there's pluses and minuses to having your business carry a family name. And it puts a little more stress on doing it right, because you go out in the community and they know that Belden Roofing is the Beldons, rather than General Roofing, who owns General Roofing. And so I hope that over the years that whoever, the next generation and the generation after that, takes great pride in the family name.
My job is not the third generation. My job is to take the torch that my grandfather and my father gave me and to deliver it to my kids, and to teach them how to run this business so that they can deliver it to their kids. That's my job. I have a defined window not to mess things up, and to educate inside that window so that they can build this business even bigger and better than what my dad and my grandfather and I have done.